Jealous. All right. Whenever I do these, I try not to spend too much time thinking about exactly what I want to say. I have to make some notes, and everything. But I feel like if I give you the raw presentation, you can see the absurdity of watching me struggle a little bit to do these things. I'm loving these Revelation passages, and I've been looking forward to talking about this. This is some pretty interesting stuff. Um, when you look at the universe, you think about something like Big Bang cosmology. You're looking at, to quote a great graphic novel and not such a great movie, in my opinion, a history of violence. This is an extraordinarily violent world. Your birth, I've made the argument for a while that I don't buy a lot of modern concepts of like self esteem and all that. Although we see people do have struggles, I think a lot of that has to do with mental inadequacies. I don't believe any one event of your life is probably going to be more violent than your birth. It's fascinating. It kind of prepares you for life. But you look at the universe and you see a universe that's this order of destruction and violence in hostility that is opposed to flourishing in this world. It's not going anywhere. And when you really take a more cosmic perspective of these things, what we talked about on Tuesday, which is the four horsemen of the apocalypse, you see that a lot of these ideas about how we're going to arrive at peace in this world are pretty silly. And the Bible fully embraces this reality. There's a lot of arguments you'll see, especially in the Unbelievable podcast, where there's just a lot of arguments for and against how Christianity improves these things or whatever the case. There's some really good stuff going on there, I think, and those are useful conversations. I'm not saying they're pointless, but I'm saying from a cosmic perspective, which is what the Old Testament and what Revelation is offering, what Jesus offers. These are little putty, pitiful little answers to big problems. There used to be a video that was on what happened before seatbelts really became a thing. And they said when they first said, hey, we're going to really make sure all cars have seatbelts, can become standard. They said a lot of mothers liked enjoying holding their children. And they said it took a lot of convincing to get them to stop doing that, to put their children in seatbelts. And they finally had to show videos to show the amount of force it would take for them to actually be able to hold on to their child, to keep their child from flying out of the car or dying. They said you basically couldn't produce enough force. Your arms are just like wet noodles. And they said you just might as well strap your children in with wet noodles. It's kind of interesting. And that's kind of when I think what the perspective Revelation is giving us on mankind's efforts to arrive at peace and peaceful solutions to this world that clearly goes against the tide of nature to say we're going to come up with some solution for peace. We just think our intelligence is going to get us there. And you don't end up with better morality by becoming more aware of what immorality is. I mean, there's no like scale where it's like, oh, people go higher in the IQ turn out to be more moral. Like that's absurd. We don't see that. So now the question is this: a lot of the arguments against this sort of issue with the world being so violent is, well, the assumption is God would have reversed this. If there was a God, he would have reversed this. He would have fixed it. That's not the perspective the Bible takes. The perspective the Bible takes is, no, God preferred to use it, that this is part of God's plan. That what we meant for evil, God meant for good. And so he conquers through this. He doesn't reverse it at all. So when God offered his son, when God offered the only peace that actually matters, which is vertical peace with himself and man, The only real peace and the desire for it from a Christian perspective is supernatural. When we look at the universe, see the violence, and say, this is wrong, we are doing something godly. I'm going to maybe make a video on this. There was a big uproar about G4 TV and this, I'm going to call her a pseudo-thinker, went on and lectured people on morals. In a sense, this desire to arrive at hey, let's behave in a way that's peaceful is a godly desire. But it's unrealistic to imagine that someone's going to get on there and start lecturing people and peace is going to arrive as a result of it. So when God offers his son, the skeptic might say, well, when he offered his son, why didn't that create peace? If that's the case, why didn't that cause a flourishing of peace? Now, many theists and Christians would say, well, it did. But that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about a supernatural reversal of what we see in the universe, a supernatural reversal of what we see in the hearts of man that plays out. And of course, the post-millennialists believe that this is the case. I don't myself. But what we see in the Bible is this. God offers true peace, and how did the world respond? It responded the same way it did to the prophets, which is even more violence. So then we say, well, why don't we clearly see God? We would probably violently reject clear pictures of God. Now, I'm not saying, okay, be very clear about this. I'm not saying you should take this to an atheist. I'm not saying that this is evident, that this is overwhelming. This is our biblical analysis of the world. I think it's accurate, but I'm not expecting anyone to be changed by this. In fact, the only way I wouldn't try to change someone's mind with this. Rather, I would want them to encounter God through this and see God change their heart. But I can't convince them with fancy words, right? I mean, it wouldn't matter. We need God to do the work here. So we have to know these things ourselves as Christians and believe these things ourselves in order to be able to be effective in ministering to people who are living a life that leads ultimately to death. So what is the church to do? Well, according to these passages that I've put in the description, what the church is to do is to desire the true peace that God offers through his son for those who appear to be even the most violent. And we are to be patient. It does not tell us. In fact, it offers the opposite. If you read the passage closely, it does not tell us to not want God's wrath. Okay? But we are to be patient and wait on God to fix all of these things that are happening, and that will ultimately be the case. So you have these martyrs that are under the altar. Now, the commentaries that I read are very interesting, say that this was, in Jewish history, a place of honor to be buried under an altar to God. There was some skepticism about that, about whether that's the correct interpretation, but kind of interesting. But these saints that were martyred are under the altar, and they're given a white robe and told to wait until the fullness of the martyrdom had been complete. So God did not want to reverse the martyrdom. Rather, he wanted the martyrdom continue. Why? Because God is a loving God and wants to see unbelievers saved. If you've seen videos where I've talked about going to atheists' videos, to not be offended so easily, to have a little bit of thick skin. Because imagine if a loved one of yours was martyred for Christ. Would you pray? Really think about this. Would you pray for the people that did this? So it's very interesting. Now, I want you to read these Revelation passages in light of what I'm getting ready to read. Well, I'm not going to read it. I'm going to bring in a special guest star to do that. You see, bring them in. Drum roll. Look who it is. All right. Zany Professor. As I'm reading this, I want you to think about the martyrs under the altar in the book of Revelation and see if this does not describe them perfectly. This is the Sermon on the Mount, Beatitudes, Matthew chapter 5, starting in verse 3. Blessed are the poor in spirit, right? You can see that in this passage. For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. They're under the altar in heaven, all right? Blessed are those who mourn, which is what the martyrs under the altar are doing. For they shall be comforted, which is what happens. They're given the white robes. Blessed are the meek, right? They are being patient, even though God has the power of wrath. For they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, which is happening to these martyrs under the altar. For they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, right? They're told to be merciful, to allow for this to happen and come to fullness. For they shall receive mercy, which has happened. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God, which is what's happening. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God, which is happening in this Revelation passage. Verse 10, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Right in line with what we're teaching. And finally, blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you.